The fight for Georgia's 2 open Senate seats hit the debate stage, last night. But one of the candidates didn't have to debate anyone. Meanwhile, Georgia's governor is pushing it back against President Trump, who is calling for him to overturn election results. Mark Strassmann has more.
Here in Georgia, you've got the president relentlessly attacking the integrity of the state's election, and you've got these major Senate runoffs. And one could affect the other, with a runoff election now less than a month away.
I have built my career.
Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler keeps her campaign message simple. She backs President Trump all the way and sidestepped when asked if the president won re-election.
President Trump has every right to use every legal recourse available. In our own state, we've seen time and again that we have investigations that need to be completed.
She called her opponent, Reverend Raphael Warnock, a radical liberal. He described her as out of touch with Georgia voters.
After being in the Senate for 10 months, she does not have a case to be made for why the people of Georgia should keep her there.
But at least they debated on the same stage. In Georgia's other runoff, Democratic challenger Jon Ossoff faced an empty podium. Incumbent Republican Senator David Perdue was a no-show.
It shows an astonishing arrogance and sense of entitlement for Georgia's senior U.S. senator to believe he shouldn't have to debate at a moment like this in our history.
The president campaigned for both candidates Saturday night in Georgia, but spent most of his hour-and-a-half-long speech complaining about his own election results. The candidates themselves spent less than 3 minutes on stage with the president.
You must go vote and vote early.
He pushed supporters to vote while casting doubt on the election process by repeating false claims he was cheated out of a victory.
We'll still win it. And they're going to try and rig this election, too.
His refusal to concede has sparked a Republican battle in Georgia. He has pressured Governor Brian Kemp to call the state's legislature into special session to overturn Joe Biden's victory here. Kemp refused again in a statement Sunday night, saying that is not an option allowed under state or federal law.
And you got to make sure your governor gets a lot tougher than he's been. He's got to get a lot tougher.
The president has also been tough on Georgia's Republican Secretary of State. Brad Raffensperger says there was no evidence of fraud in Georgia.
But right now, we don't see anything that would overturn, the will of the people here in Georgia.
Top Republicans here are worried that the president focusing on the fraud allegations could undermine something here. It could discourage Republicans from turning out at next month's runoff. Vlad and Emery.
Mark, thank you. Greg Bluestein, political reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, was a panelist at the Loeffler-Warnock debate, and he's joining us now. So thank you so much for joining us, first off. Senator Loeffler, and Reverend Raphael Warnock certainly didn't hesitate to go after each other, and they were both asked about the president's baseless accusations of voter fraud. I want to play some of that sound.
Greg, it's very clear that there were issues in this election. There are 250 investigations open, including an investigation into one of my opponent's organizations, for voter fraud.
It's time to put this behind us and get focused on the concerns of ordinary people. While she's playing political games, trying to represent somebody who doesn't live in Georgia, Georgians are wondering when are they going to get some COVID-19 relief.
So Senator Loeffler has been repeating the president's, talking points about voter fraud in the state and beyond. And I'm wondering, is she sort of sticking to this? Is the belief that this sort of talk will ignite the Republican base, will keep them engaged until they have to head back to the polls again? Because it seems like the sort of thing that would almost deter you from voting if you're told over and over again that the system is flawed and rigged.
Exactly, that's the message. That's the conflicting message here in Georgia that President Trump has pushed. It's vote in January 5th election, but they're also rigged. So it is sending the message to some Republicans to why bother. Now, to be clear, most Republicans are going to go out and vote, especially the people who showing up at these rallies who are paying attention to the races. But I've talked to more than a dozen Republicans at different events across Georgia who've said they are debating among themselves about whether to cast a ballot. And what you saw from Senator Loeffler, she hasn't quite said that she believes the election was rigged, but she also won't say whether or not she disavows President Trump. And that's because the president has continued to attack Republicans who have acknowledged Joe Biden's victory in Georgia, including Jeff Duncan, the lieutenant governor. The president called Jeff Duncan the other day a puppet of Governor Kemp and has gone relentlessly after Governor Kemp for refusing to call a special session that would illegally overturn the election results. So Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue have to walk this very fine line, not trying to demoralize Republican voters, but also not trying to antagonize the president.
Yeah, Greg, what is so fascinating to me is why some of these Republicans continue to show fealty to President Trump when he clearly, at the moment's notice where he feels that they are not 100% loyal to him, even if he's making baseless accusations or he's attacking reporters or Gold Star parents, that he's willing to toss them overboard, they continue to support him. Meanwhile, you had some questions about Reverend Warnock and whether or not he'd expand the Supreme Court or how much money he wanted to see in a COVID-19 relief package. Is he sort of distancing himself from the far left faction of the Democratic Party? And if so, why is that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's distancing himself because it's interesting. In Georgia, you used to have Democratic candidates run away from national figures like Bernie Sanders, like Nancy Pelosi. And now you've got both Jon Ossoff and Reverend Warnock embracing Bernie Sanders' recent endorsement of them. So they're not quite running away, but Reverend Warnock was very hard to pin down. We couldn't pin him down on whether or not he supports expanding the Supreme Court or a dollar figure for what he expects Congress to pass in terms of economic stimulus release for the pandemic. And I think he said it hasn't crossed his mind yet, but certainly both those questions have come up on the campaign trail as well. And I just don't think he wants to give Republicans a talking point, an attack advantage. But at the same time, these are pressing questions. And of course, the Supreme Court expansion would affect the daily lives of all of Georgians.
Overall, how do you think the debate went? Did voters hear the information that they needed in order to make a final decision?
I mean, I think voters heard a lot more talking points and a lot of dodging of some of the questions we wanted the candidates to answer. But I also think the candidates had a chance to clarify and expand on some of their policy points and some of their platforms. And of course, the clash between the candidates, when the candidates got to ask each other questions. You heard Reverend Warnock ask pointedly whether or not Senator Loeffler thinks Donald Trump lost the election. And you got to hear Kelly Loeffler attack Reverend Warnock and question him on some of the attack ads that here in Georgia we can't turn on TV without seeing. And so we heard Reverend Warnock get to respond to that as well. So I think that's valuable for the discourse as Georgians get ready to make up their minds.
Let's talk about Jon Ossoff, who's challenging incumbent Senator David Perdue for Georgia's other Senate seat. There was an empty podium. Senator Perdue refused to debate, and he did not show up. Still, Ossoff came out swinging at his opponent. I want to play a little bit of that.
The reason that our country has lagged the entire world at the efficacy of our response to this virus, the reason that we are losing thousands of people per day to this virus is because of the arrogance of politicians like David Perdue, so arrogant that he disregarded public health expertise, and so arrogant that he's not with us here today to answer questions.
I note that Mr. Ossoff then yesterday, as you know, Greg, tweeted a photo. It wasn't a photo, it was a little emoji of a chicken, and that's all that was in the tweet. But what is Perdue's strategy here? I mean, just objectively speaking, you not turning up to debate your opponent, which is, the people deserve to hear your positions on a number of subjects from the questions that you and your colleagues in the media are asking and the press are asking. It does strike one that it's either because he's afraid to debate Mr. Ossoff, or he just doesn't feel that he is answerable to the people there. And it sort of is striking because we're in this coronavirus pandemic, and a lot of people have suggested that inaction from the Trump administration is the reason why we've got 276,000 people dead in this country. And this sort of is a picture of what we've lived through over the last 8 months.
And that picture you just saw on the screen is going to be the picture that Jon Ossoff's going to push relentlessly through January 5th, which is the empty podium. And look, we would have loved to have Senator Perdue join in the debate. We had lots of questions ready. We were excited about a spirited back and forth between him and Jon Ossoff. We didn't get that chance. And I think part of it is reflective of of Senator Perdue's strategy. He had 2 debates with Jon Ossoff in the first round, and right now he is focusing almost exclusively on conservative media outlets. He's doing very few interviews with local reporters. We're not even being made aware of some of his campaign stops in advance in terms of the Atlanta media. And he's speaking almost exclusively to Fox News and conservative outlets. And that's his choice. But that also reflects a strategy of speaking directly to the base rather than trying to persuade undecided voters.
Greg, let me ask you a quick question before we wrap this up. You know, it's interesting. Anne-Marie and I talked about this leading up to the election. We saw a lot in the media, a lot of people who are very smart, giving us what their best guess based on polling was going to be for the United States Senate. And we saw a lot of races that people were saying were really, really close, really, really tight, like in South Carolina, like in Maine, really not end up tight at all. What is your sense of what is happening in Georgia? It's so fascinating to me that Senator Perdue would spend his time just going on conservative media outlets and preaching to the choir. Does he and Senator Loeffler need, for example, African-American voters, people in some of the urban areas to come out and vote for them? Or are they able to win these elections, these 2 runoffs, with just their conservative base, the people who support President Trump? Also, with the uphill battle that President Trump is undermining the very election that they're trying to win.
Yeah, great question. Republicans got about 2.5 million votes here in Georgia without having to try to moderate their message. They ran, both Senator Loeffler and Senator Perdue ran very close with President Trump the entire general election campaign. So they feel like they don't need to try to appeal. You know, of course, they're going to continue. They're not going to say this out loud, maybe, but they don't feel like they need to moderate their message or appeal to voters that don't necessarily usually vote for Republicans. They feel like they can get as much of that 2.5 million pool out, because it will be a lower turnout election no matter what, then they will win. And Democrats are going to the same strategy. You know, they're also going after their pool of 2.5 million or so voters. Republicans probably have an edge because historically they have an edge in statewide runoffs in Georgia, and no Democrat has won the state of Georgia in a statewide race since 2006. But Joe Biden showed a path as he carried the state for the first time in a presidential election since '92. He showed a path that the Democrats could follow.
Really, really interesting. Greg Bluestein, always great to have you, my friend. Thank you very much. Nice job last night.
Thank you.